so you guys can just kind of...
It's front facing right now?
Yeah, you can double check it.
Can you make sure it's good?
Yeah, you might need to plug it in.
We'll grab a charger. How does that angle work? Elliot, I need your help. How's that angle?
Nope, trash.
Trash angle?
Move it a little bit down. It needs to be farther down. Yep.
Hold on. Let's just,
Yeah. Yeah. That works.
It's set up.
Isn't it?
I can't even see. You guys
Elliot, does it look good?
Yeah, that's yeah, it could be a lot worse.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, I need
thanks.
counterweight. Grab me a counterweight. Grab me a job or something.
That doesn't weigh anything.
No, it does.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Can everybody
Wait,
hear me?
Elliot.
Hi. Not working?
I think it's on.
You just really close. Yeah. Hi, everybody. On behalf of Yale Students for Bernie, we'd like to extend our warmest welcome to our speakers, Michael Brooks and Kyle Kulinski. Yale Students for Bernie is a Yale College Dean's Office recognized official organization, and we are sort of part of the umbrella organization of Students for Bernie, which is part of the Bernie 2020 campaign. We're dedicated to the promotion of democratic socialism, as well as Bernie's plans such as Medicare for all, immigration reform, and a Green New Deal. So our event will begin with our panelists giving a brief introduction about themselves and their work, and then our panel moderators will ask a series of questions, and then we will open it up for audience questions as well. So we have three moderators, Zach, Amal, and Mel. And so one thing we have to say is that Yale University does not share the views of Mr. Brooks and Mr. Kulinski, nor does it endorse Bernie Sanders for president.
I was personally told by the president that they share my views.
That being said, we would also like to draw attention to the fact that Yale is very, very complicit in these systems of oppression that we are talking about reforming tonight. So we're thankful for Kyle and Michael's creation of a space that welcomes leftist views and for their presence here tonight. So without further ado, Kyle Kulinski and Michael Brooks, please follow their social media and subscribe to them on YouTube, and also follow Yale for Bernie on Twitter and Instagram, and like the Yale Students for Bernie Facebook page. All right, and so another round of applause for our speakers.
Yeah, sure. My name's Kyle. I'm the host of Secular Talk and co-founder of Justice Democrats. And, that one I'm very proud of, I must say. And yeah, I just do my show every week and talk about politics a crazy amount, but I love it, and I'm very thankful that you all invited me here, and I'm happy to be here today with you, so thank you so much.
I'm Michael Brooks. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. I host a show called The Michael Brooks Show. It's a very inventive name. I co-host another show called The Majority Report, and a third show called Woke Bros. So I'm actually just constantly speaking, and it's great. It's an honor and privilege to be here tonight, and let's make Yale the epicenter of Bernie in the state of Connecticut.
All right, so without further ado, I think we'll just jump in. Before we get into, we have a lot of questions that we prepared, but news always happens. And today, as just a few hours ago, the former president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, no less than a few hours after being released, he took to Twitter to thank Bernie Sanders for his solidarity and endorsed him to be president of the United States. So I wanted to ask Michael, and Michael has talked a lot about this. What is the significance of the solidarity between Bernie Sanders and Lula, and what is the significance of his freedom?
the significance of the solidarity is there's a moral reason why we should be concerned about all parts of the world and how various problems, connect and reinforce each other. And particularly if you're voting in the United States, frankly, you have an obligation to consider that the foreign policy conducted by the United States, and this is not a good thing. We have an incredibly undemocratic foreign policy process in this country, which is a major problem. But the reality is that when they talk about what a president can do on day one, they pretty much have unlimited power on foreign policy. Or, the conflicts they have in foreign policy, if they want to reform it, will be with the intelligence and military-industrial complex, essentially. So you have an obligation to consider what a vast majority of the Earth's landmass will be affected by how you vote and what your foreign policy is. And in Bernie Sanders, you have somebody who has shown solidarity and understood these dynamics going back to the 1980s when he went to Nicaragua to fight against the Reagan administration's dirty wars. Now, Lula specifically, and the reason I've talked about this so much is that one, Brazil is actually an incredibly geostrategically important country. It's the biggest country in Latin America. It's a member of the BRICS. It has a huge amount of natural resources and cultural power and so on. And it just so happens that Lula, even from prison, if you watch this man's interviews, has exactly the type of strategic analysis, empathy, and vision to beat neoliberalism and right-wing authoritarianism in Brazil and globally. And the fact that a guy who has been made a political prisoner, who has withstood so much, I mean, he was in jail in the 80s when he was a labor union leader. The fact that a couple of weeks ago in an interview that they said, what are you gonna do when you get out of here, if you get out? It was still a very unlikely outcome. He's like, well, they should know that when I do, I'm going to go on the streets and have a conversation with the Brazilian people. Is exactly the type of basically energy and aggression, I'm not going to use any other word, that is necessary. So the solidarity counts. There's a parallel between some of these figures, a Corbyn, a Sanders, a Lula, and as far as I'm concerned, come on, Cardi B, Cornel West, Lula, they still. Who else are you going to vote for?
Awesome. Well, we're definitely going to get back to foreign policy, but I just wanted to open it up with that since it's kind of fresh news. So I'm going to turn the conversation to healthcare, something that's sort of always the first topic of discussion in these debates. Elizabeth Warren put out her funding plan, and critics suggest that it's regressive, saying that it's sort of relying on a Medicare head tax instead of a payroll tax. So, to both of you, maybe start with Kyle, what do you see are the distinct differences between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren? Is it worth getting into this fight right now? And what makes one better than the other?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I do think it matters that Bernie's proposal is more progressive and it does not rely on the Medicare head tax, and it relies on a Medicare payroll tax. I actually don't, I'm not against the fact that Elizabeth Warren felt this instinct to frame it as, no, I'm not going to raise taxes on the middle class. But you do see that Bernie's just more honest and upfront when he says, well, yes, I am going to do that, but it is offset by the fact that I'm getting rid of your premiums, your co-pays, and your deductibles. So, what I've advised behind the scenes, and there's certain people like Nina Turner in the campaign who are using this talking point, and others, is that you have to describe that as a private tax, because that's exactly what it is. You have to pay your premiums, your co-pays, and your deductibles. So since you have to pay it, why don't we call that a tax? And then when you frame it like that, and Nina Turner made this point, brought it into the end zone, it's like, okay, well then Medicare for All is kind of a tax cut, isn't it? It's a tax cut for the middle class, because you're saving money, and you're also getting health care, and everybody's covered, and it's less expensive. So I do think there's a difference between Bernie's plan and Elizabeth Warren's plan. Obviously, I support the more progressive version because I think it does keep more money in working families' pockets when you go Bernie's route. But I am also, I must say, happy that at least there's another candidate in the race who's not, talking endlessly about the need for choice and protecting private insurance companies. I think that it's time, when you explain it to the American people why that notion is fundamentally absurd in the realm of healthcare, they get it. they get it. I made the joke on my show. It's like Pete Buttigieg and his Medicare for all who want it. Imagine somebody saying, like, I'm in favor of firefighters for all who want it. Like, no, you should just be in favor of firefighters, full stop. So there is a difference. Bernie's plan is better. It keeps more money in the pockets of working families. But at the same time, I am happy that she's at least not going down that path of talking about choice and catering to for-profit health insurance companies.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kyle just said, so I'll make a more political point. And I was talking with Anna Kasparian about this on my show. Shouts to Anna.
I love for Anna.
Yeah, Anna's the best. So, but it reveals to me, I actually sympathize when Elizabeth Warren was trying to do what Nina Turner is doing, which is basically saying it's a BS way of framing the question, right? Like, you almost certainly are going to save money on Medicare for all, and even if we broaden it out, I did a conversation with a really important healthcare academic, Jamila Michener, who I think is at Cornell, and I mean, by the end of the conversation, it was essentially like, unless you're Jeff Bezos, this system doesn't work for you. Because even if you have an extraordinary, like even if you're doing really well, you are susceptible to be wiped out in the private health insurance system. And so I was sympathetic with Warren's pushback. But the problem is that one, first and foremost, she did choose an objectively regressive option. A head tax is the regressive way to do this, and also there's some interesting, I think that this is more speculative, but it could certainly, the way she did it, could incentivize companies to push more people into being private contractors, which is a huge problem. But she has bad political instincts. Like, the Bernie Sanders route of let's not play a bunch of semantic games, it's a tax, but you're gonna save, it goes against prevailing wisdom that you never wanna say you support any kind of tax cut, but it fits with his like just plain spoken direct style. And what's gonna happen, what is funny to me with Warren is like, do you think Donald Trump in a general election is going to go, oh, well, head tax actually is a good tax? So
I crunched the numbers.
Yeah.
Tremendous numbers.
I think we're going to have to play this one straight. Let's win this one on the merits. Everybody gets that it's a tax. And in fact, it's the more regressive option. So I think Elizabeth Warren, and look, I don't need to get into all the other aspects of this, but the DNA test, disaster. She gets psyched out by the right, and then she has a reciprocal relationship with the core of her base, which is journalists. And she writes a new blog post, and they go, oh my God, that blog post is so detailed. And this is not gonna work in the general election. And the way she approached that healthcare thing, and frankly, even in some ways got suckered into it by the pressure from the Buttigieg's of the world. She could have easily just said, look, I'm not gonna complicate this. Bernie wrote the plan. Here's a couple of different funding mechanism options. There isn't that much daylight between us on this, and stop lying about healthcare. She felt the need to go in this direction, keep her tax game going, ended up choosing the more regressive option, which will be very easy to run against, and bad ultimately for the prospects of Medicare for all.
By the way, it's also tied into, we should just add this fact, that it's also tied into her wealth tax. She made her wealth tax, it was 3%, and now she made it 6% to also fund it, and she tied in immigration reform to Medicare for all and savings from immigration reform, which all that stuff I have no problem with in theory, like the idea of like redirecting and reallocating funding in that way, but I think it does just make it, objectively speaking, harder to pass. It's less likely to pass. Not that Medicare for all would ever be easy to pass, you're gonna have to fight for it no matter what, but I think Bernie's method is just a lot more straightforward and has a higher likelihood of passing, also because it's not tied into all the other issues.
I also just have a question. I mean, specifically, she ties it into immigration reform, which is, well, Bernie just put out the best immigration proposal anybody has put out in modern politics, which ties to foreign policy. And labor rights, and is an actual synthesis of the problems. So that's where we need to go. But, and I'm putting this out here as a question. If part of the revenue you're projecting to pay for Medicare for all is documenting people based off of their taxes. I mean, maybe that's part of the head tax, but I see a tension between, I mean, no new middle-class taxes except for people who have become documented. Like, it's a genuine question. I don't know what that means in terms of how she incorporated it.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think is the effect of this discussion on the fight for Medicare for all? So we have a debate in a couple of weeks later, and so far it's been Warren and Bernie, yeah, we're both Medicare for all, we're fighting against Biden and Buttigieg. Do you think this sort of fractures the Medicare for all base, trying to figure out how we're going to pay for it, while the Bidens and Buttigieg's are all just saying, like, no?
I think at the macro level, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this, Michael, but I think on the macro level, it's just a good thing to have another voice that's saying Medicare for all, Medicare for all, Medicare for all, Medicare for all. Because what it does is it drags that Overton window back to the left, and that's a massive problem that we've had for so long in the Democratic Party, is that they were all competing to see who could run further right. I mean, you go back and you look at the debates even with Obama, who was a very skilled politician, but go look at, the policy discussions they were really having. It was it's centrist to put it nicely. I'll put it very nicely to say it's very centrist. So I just think it's good to have that other voice up there, but again, the devil is always in the details, and I don't think it's really an open question as to which bill is better for working families. So I think it's a hard line to walk, but we have to walk this line of being able to criticize it and say Bernie's bill is better, while at the same time acknowledging that it's a positive thing to have two voices in the race, kind of unapologetically saying Medicare for all over and over and over.
Yeah, I think that there's, especially as people lie about it and obscure what Medicare for all is more and more, it is very important that it's important that she didn't come out and pull a Kamala Harris or a Buttigieg, which I totally thought was possible, to be honest with you.
So did I, absolutely.
Yeah, so that is important. On a political level, though, I don't think it's so great that you put a regressive option in there that it's wonky enough to be kind of hard to explain to people in terms of how it fits into a broader good plan, and simple and distillable enough to turn into like a relentless amount of attack on it. So, 70% positive, but 30% she might have planted some real bombs for us.
And the media is also going to be a big problem in this, because I've now seen this dynamic happening a lot recently, where the media will, over and over, they'll say, Warren's wealth tax, or Warren's Medicare for all. And like, that now becomes, so now it's interesting, because we all look into that trap then of saying like, wait, no, wealth tax is a good idea, or Medicare for all is a good idea. But we also just kind of agreed that it's Warren who's pushing it, and Bernie's, sitting in the corner like, what? I'm the one who's talking about this. What are you doing? So it's a little unfair because, the media has 1,000 tricks up their sleeves, and this is just another one where my biggest fear is it's worse if the media is indifferent to Bernie than if they're like actively against Bernie. I'd rather them write negative articles about Bernie than say nothing about him. Yeah, because the negative articles, I think people are intelligent enough to know when an attack is nonsense, and so often, in many respects, when the media goes after Bernie, it backfires, because people are like, that's a ridiculous criticism. Why would you? So it actually gets more people to go to Bernie, but now it seems like they're almost catching on to that, and they're going more the path of indifference.
Warren's social media team furiously looking up Wikipedia to find out who Lula is. She called to free this political prisoner. Yeah, he did, yeah. I actually wonder if the ignored dynamic is so brazen and hilarious that, clearly it is its own form of attack, and it might be playing some of the same role you're talking about. Like that when you can look at, how many articles need to come out that just show a poll that's like, there's 3 candidates who are in the top 3, whatever way you're configuring it, that is like, Biden, Warren, and whoa, look at Pete. It's like redacted. It's so obvious.
Who says it's enforced with a strong force?
Yeah, strong force, that's literally what they said.
And that touches on an important question. We actually wanted to ask you guys about what you guys see as the importance of having independent media, especially covering the 2020 election. and like what you guys do that the mainstream media can't, especially when you're talking about how exactly, especially when you're talking about how Bernie's being excluded from major headlines and polls.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with mainstream media, there really is just this like veneer of like fake professionalism, where you're in a bubble where everybody says what they think they're supposed to say to get along with their colleagues, and it's a club, and it is an elitist club, it is. And then there's guys like me and Michael, and we're just regular people. And so, you know, I read something, I form an opinion on it, and then I share it with you guys. And the other thing I do is I try to make all my biases clear up front. You know, I don't think my biases are biases, and it's just, hey, this is an opinion I have, but I'll walk you through it and I'll tell it to you. The thing that frustrates me is, like, I'll tell everybody what my politics are, but if you turn on CNN, you turn on MSNBC, they do this weird thing where it's like they hide it. But like we know who you favor, like we know who your favorite candidates are, how they've tried so hard to pump up Mayor Pete. You know, there was a moment after the debate where they inexplicably said Klobuchar had a great night. But it would be so much more digestible if they would just say it. If they would just say, hey, listen, you know, the status quo is cool, I'm making so much money, and here are the candidates that I prefer, and I'm an incrementalist at best. But they don't do that. And so I think that our role is to just provide a voice for people that's, you know, a unique and different and outsider perspective as opposed to the same stuff. Like, it's just, and also, let's just be honest here, they're so boring. And we're not. And they're really boring. So, yeah, that's the difference.
And not good.
Not good, no. Not good, Michael. Very bad.
So many people have said it. Yeah, I think everything Kyle said, again, it's another area we're going to agree with. I think I really would recommend that everybody read Manufacturing Consent.
Yes.
Like, it's really, because you have to understand this not as a conspiracy theory. Like, there are so many conversations that don't need to happen when everybody shares the same framework. I mean, you know, and again, it's different if that framework is dominating major media conglomerates, and they're also pretending to be, you know, just call balls and strikes, right? Like, no doubt, on my show, like, you know, I'm gonna pass the ball to Matt. He knows what play we're making. You know, we're not gonna all of a sudden say, actually, I think Mayor Pete's making a lot of sense, you know. But we're transparent about what we're doing. And I actually think in the big picture, like, it's a huge advantage of the media right now that you get to have people like us, without a doubt. And then there's people on the flip side who are below the curve, right? And they're putting out a lot of really toxic stuff. I actually am of the mind that it's not healthy that there aren't media institutions that actually genuinely serve that role. Like, it's a problem, as an example, that like, when it's outside of its sphere of influence, Al Jazeera English has way higher coverage of so many issues than mainstream American outlets, and it's also owned by the fucking Qatari monarchy, right? And that has its own foreign policy implications, which, you know, again, I respect people tremendously who work at Al Jazeera, but I think we're playing a really important role, and it reflects the failing of corporate media. But ultimately, especially when you consider like the budgets necessary for investigative journalism and things like that, it's a problem that is shrinking as a space, and most institutions that are supposed to do that are doing terribly.
So what does it look like? You guys are independent creators on the left. What's the dynamic between the left and the right in terms of online YouTube creators, independent journalists? Is it, you know, there's more on the right? Are they louder? How do you see the balance between the two?
That's a good question.
Do we need more on the left?
I mean, it's always the more the better on the left, the more the merrier, I should say. That sounds a lot better, but the more the yeah, but I mean, the big difference is we're out there talking about, you know, Medicare for all, free college, living wage, ending the wars, Green New Deal, all this good stuff, and they're out there like just in a very toxic manner, engaging in the culture war and just saying terrible things. So the difference is we're providing something positive. They're mostly pushing for negative stuff. But yeah, the more the merrier on the left for sure. I mean, I don't view it. It's not a zero-sum game. So when you do well, I'm not like Michael's doing well. That's not cool. I'm just like, oh, that's awesome. Good for him. Because it's more with us, and it is a big advantage in many ways because it actually is more about the ideology. Like I want to spread news and politics and information, but it is also about the ideology. I want to, let everybody know that we don't have to live in a country where you work full time and you don't make enough money to survive. Like I think that's wild that we still live in that country, but we can change that. So spreading ideas like that, I think is really important. And yeah, I would love it if more people got involved in that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Kyle. Although I admit I'm super competitive. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing, and this is just, being super transparent, like for people like us who are lucky enough to make a living doing it, we literally need your support. Like you do need, if you have the capacity to become members of shows like ours, because there aren't like socialist slush funds to like
That's such a good point.
like that's just a basic structural difference.
No billionaire backers for us.
No billionaire backers. There are no, corporate interests willing to funnel money into people who maybe are extremely not bright and talk about ideas a lot. Ideas. So it really is an absolutely different type of community and context. And then I think, the other thing too, like we're doing very different types of content than people on the right. I think it's always the answer of what needs to be answered, what needs to be debunked, what needs to be dealt with, and then also what, one of the things I definitely try to do on my show a lot is do a lot of global and a lot of history coverage, because I want, as best I can, to tell a bigger story about what's happening in the world. And part of the answer, we just do these mini docs, and this latest one we just did was on the 1970s in Jamaica, which is a fascinating CIA, drugs, and socialism story. And this comment I saw, which is the most gratifying comment you can get, is somebody who's like, oh man, this is so cool, I'm so glad I left Ben Shapiro and checked this out. And what I think is interesting about that is all of us someone like Kyle does an amazing job of just out debating people like that. And we ought to debunk them and mock them and so on. But I also think we also just need to show a much broader playing field. Don't you actually want to know about the history of how this economy actually works, or what's happening in Brazil, or whatever? That's actually dynamic and interesting and engaging, and not just boring, headed bullshit.
Yeah, there's one thing to be on the defense and constantly combating what the right is saying. There's another to be on the offense and telling our own history, right, and putting that out there. So that's great. I think we'll move on to another sort of policy field, which for a lot of college students and young people is really important, is climate change. So Greenpeace ranked all of the candidates' platforms. Bernie Sanders was given the highest rating, he got an A+. No other candidate did receive an A+ for theirs. But he's sort of pivoting now, where he's trying to make climate change the winning platform. His campaign director of Iowa said that they're trying to make Iowa, that's how he's going to win Iowa, is to do climate change. He's there with AOC right now this weekend, they're doing a bunch of rallies. So how effective do you think that is?
Well, I think Bernie's wonderful at messaging because, like Michael was alluding to earlier, he's very straightforward. And I think that oftentimes in Democratic politics, people overthink stuff too much and they come up with goofy arguments. And people just want to be talked to like people. And I think that Bernie frames this in a wonderful way because really it's two issues in one when you think about climate change. And if you link it into the economy and jobs and an infrastructure deal and the future of technology and the patents and the inevitable patents that are coming in the future with these technologies, then, I mean, it's a hard message to be. Like, that's the thing that I always found really weird about Democratic strategists is they take issues where they have a built-in massive advantage and they mess it up. And it's like, this is so easy. Like, imagine how easy it should be to get elected when you're running on like, hey, I think we should abolish all student loan debt. It's like, people are gonna go, yeah, I like that idea. Or, you know, I think we should create more jobs or raise wages or have healthcare for everybody. So Bernie's brilliant at this stuff, and I do think that running on a Green New Deal is a wonderful idea because there are the obvious upsides of, you know, combating climate change, which is absolutely necessary. We don't have a choice. We have to do that. But also emphasis on the New Deal part of the Green New Deal. And, you know, I don't know if people know this, but we had a president by the name FDR, and he kept getting elected over and over and over to the point where Republicans were like, we need to come up with term limits because we will never win another election because we cannot beat somebody who's advocating for social democracy and who actually is fighting for working people. So, yeah, I think it's a political winner, and I look forward to listening to his message on that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the campaign right now, and this is, you know, pretty much never true, but and it's true in some local races now too, like a guy like Shahid Buttar who's running against Nancy Pelosi.
I love that you all know, that's so great. No, that's wonderful. I hope you're all residents of California.
Seriously. Or Michaela Wilkes against Danny Boyer. So, you know, if you do like a formulation, it's like if they do what they need to do and we do what we need to do, they can win. And, you know, a vast majority of Democratic candidates are not, you know, it's like, okay, Hillary will absolutely suck, and maybe we will prevent fascism from getting elected to the presidency. You don't have that in these candidates. You know, you have that in Bernie Sanders. So I think, like, he's putting everything on in the game right now. And so I think it is a smart strategy for Iowa. I'm sure there's the numbers they have. I think that there's an agricultural sector argument. There's definitely a youth and student, you know, argument. But it's also like we get to basically test out all of the things that we've been saying because he's doing it. So we got to show up for it. I mean, I know that that's kind of like what everybody here is doing, but that's really the bottom line. They're testing a new model. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. And people have to go and show up at the caucuses and do it.
And let me just add on to that real quick. You know, there's this fundamental delusion that they have in Washington, D.C. that the way you win elections as a Democrat is in the primary you can run to the left, but then in the general you have to run to the right because you have to get these moderates. And if you run to the right, that's how you're a serious candidate, that's how you win a general election. And, you know, it's amazing that even when we disprove that in real time, they still hold on to that delusion. And if anything, they go further in that direction because they say, oh, no, the problem with Hillary was that she catered too much to Bernie in the general, she should have run further right. It's like, okay, but you haven't even tried the opposite. You haven't even tried to run actually believing in something and believing in a comprehensive left-wing vision. If you try it...
Off-season work is for, like, Walmart. You know, I mean, that's the other just, like, economic reality of a lot of these people dispensing advice, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a permanent consultant class in Washington, D.C., and they're, you know, they get paid to give their bad advice. And even though the Democrats lost 1,000 seats in the Obama era, they still thought, like, oh, well, I guess we gotta run even further right in the next election. And, you know, Trump even disproved this notion of a pivot, and it didn't occur to them. I remember reading the articles after Trump won the primary and was running in the general, and all the mainstream media was like, where's the pivot? I thought he was going to pivot. He's not pivoting. He's saying the same stuff that he was saying in the primary. And it's like, yeah, and he also has a terrible message. Imagine if you don't pivot and you're on the left and you actually believe in those ideas and you take those strong ideas to a general election. Guys, we're talking about absolutely obliterating Donald Trump. We're talking about landsliding Donald Trump. And their argument is West Virginia. Okay, go look at West Virginia and Bernie Sanders won every single county in West Virginia against Hillary Clinton. So this idea that like, oh, he can't win in conservative states or he can't win in purple states, he's the only one who can win in those states. So yeah, we have to get rid of that notion, and then you'll see a left that actually starts to win, a Democratic Party that starts to win, and we can finally change this country for the better.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who, you know, unemployed auto workers, as an example, who really are worried about wealthy people's taxes going up.
Like, I love Joe Manchin voted to like deregulate Wall Street, and it's like, do you think
Coal miners love it.
Yeah, you think people in West Virginia are like, I gotta make sure I vote for somebody who's gonna deregulate it more?
Yeah, well, and the idea that we hear all the time is that you'd rather pivot right to win 10 swing state voters than stay left and win
All new voters.
30 million in non-voters.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even just like, what's funny is even on their much more limited terms, it's just a stupid view of the map. Because, like, if everybody can kind of agree that, like, all right, even if you're running a fairly standard election, you gotta win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, which are like exactly the states where the profile of voters would fit. Give me a real message on economic justice. Like, even if you wanted to stipulate, like, we can argue about how many new people you can mobilize, all this stuff. And then ironically, other than like the suburbs in Philadelphia, which like Chuck Schumer and whatever imaginary people he talks to in his head, that's a real thing, look that up. He has a family called the Baileys that are his imaginary friends. And they live in Massapequa, and he asks them questions. Look it up. But like, you know, okay, so maybe like Bill Gates will vote for Donald Trump over Bernie Sanders, no doubt, because he's an oligarch and there's no such thing as a billionaire that is compatible with democracy. But across the vast majority of that map, in the specific zones you need to win, it is indisputable that that is the best way to run.
And it's indisputable Bernie's the best candidate for those places.
Indisputable.
I mean, and you know, Biden in some of the polls is also doing well in these places. How long is that going to last when Donald Trump is on stage with Joe Biden and he starts screaming that this guy did NAFTA? Because that's exactly what Trump did to Hillary, and Trump won. So, you know, it's the populism. That's the main point here, is it's the populism. And you're either going to have a fake populist on the right who ultimately furthers the needs of the establishment, or you're going to have a real populist on the left. Those are our only choices.
And by the way, and also on the issues of, you know, Trump's demagoguery and bigotry, even there. Because I mean, this guy, Donald Trump is so shameless in a way that makes him kind of funny. That, I find Donald Trump funny.
Fake news, Michael.
If somebody repeats that I said that, I'll say it was fake news. But when he was running for president, now this is a man who called Haiti a shithole country and has tried to strip temporary protective status for Haitians who came here after the earthquake. And frankly, I mean, you look at our policy towards Haiti, we should give Haiti $1 trillion and issue multiple public apologies. But that being as it may, he went to the Haitian section in Miami when he was running for president. And he said, and it's true, the Clintons have an abominable record in Haiti. Donald Trump went to Haitian voters in Miami and went, the Clinton global initiative has been terrible to Haiti, and walked around and said, I talked to the Haitians, they're outraged because of crooked Hillary. And Joe Biden, I think, has given him more than enough examples to be able to, I thought that was super racist, Joe. That guy will go anywhere. He'll go anywhere. You need, someone like Bernie will not only not get into the, like, what is he gonna, like, crazy Bernie? And Bernie's like, okay, thank you, Mr. President. It's a disgrace that people don't have blah, 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 blah. And it just, I mean, the relentlessness of that message with the credibility of delivery, that's how you do it.
Anyway, yeah, if you guys can go to the next question. We've been battling for like an hour.
I did want to touch on something. You guys talked about Bernie's populism. But also, what I think is really important to point out with Bernie, a new Quinnipiac poll just came out talking about how Bernie Sanders supporters are extremely excited to vote for him. The exact percentage is 52%. And there's a massive gap between Sanders supporters that are very excited to vote for him versus the other candidates. You have Buttigieg with only 31%, 19% for Biden supporters, and 23% for Warren supporters. So how significant is this in a general election against Trump, having this amount of enthusiasm?
That's gigantic. I mean, that's everything, because that's turnout. That speaks to turnout. You know, it's one thing to be like, yeah, I guess this person, fine, I guess I'll vote for them. And it's another thing to be like, oh my God, I cannot wait to go vote for this person. It's going to be awesome. And that's the feeling I had when I voted in the 2016 primary for Bernie. I was like going to the polling station with a smile on my face, like, I'm going to vote for somebody who actually represents the stuff that I believe in. That's amazing, because usually when you go vote, it's like, there's like 4 or 5 issues where I'm just not in agreement with this person, but okay, I guess I gotta go vote for this person. So, I mean, you can just turn out so many more people. I think people can sense when you really believe in something, and when you really stand for something. And I think that that authenticity shines through and really explains the enthusiasm gap. And, you know, listen, the one thing about Donald Trump is that his base is not going to abandon him. No. He's got a base of people that will not abandon him. His rallies to this day are wild.
They could be personally defrauded by Trump University. Which is really, that was so smart.
Yeah. And Trump would give a rally saying, I do the most amazing fraud you've ever seen. Unbelievable. So, yeah, I mean, the enthusiasm gap is everything. There were other interesting facts in that poll too that I'm blanking on right now, but it's, you know, speaks to that general idea, this idea of an enthusiasm gap. And that's why I always say, when you want to have this conversation about electability, Bernie is the most electable for that reason. And it's funny that you will not find a single voice in corporate media that says that. Not one. Not one. There's a giant underrepresentation of people who believe what we believe. And that's a shame. And if only we could get our act together and start screaming about it every day like the right does, because the right has played this game for so long where they scream about bias against the right and the liberal media. And then what happens is if you're loud enough and long enough, if you're persistent enough, they eventually cave and they're like, okay, fine, here, come in, come on. And that's why you see people like Corey Lewandowski got hired on CNN, and all these people have no business being on there. But unfortunately, you know, we're too nice. We don't have teeth like the right does. Like, we don't berate the media 24/7.
There's actually a new piece by one of the guys from Politico, and it's hilarious because he's like, you know, the media actually has a center-right bias. And you should be sharing that far and wide, including like just tweeting it at media people, because I do think they, to some extent, we're talking about this on the Jar Report, they respond, that kind of pressure works on them, because they're very look over their shoulders, kind of follow trends sort of people. Not only does Bernie have the enthusiasm to win, the other part that is so important about this is like, it is the day after the election, which is even harder, unfortunately. And what's funny is like, if you went and you looked at their policy proposals, you know, certainly Warren's like reform agenda, but even like what Joe Biden's healthcare plan, which is nothing, would never pass today. No, it's like a really important point, right? Like an actual public option that would be a relative gain on healthcare is DOA on arrival in Congress, right? And this is fascinating because this is another argument for Bernie, because people are like, look, you can, you know, you can't even pass like, you know, you couldn't even pass like the friggin' like ACA there. How is he gonna do something that's like actually left when we know that Congress is owned by corporations and many in the Democratic Party are well to the right and in the pockets of all of these interests? And the answer always is, and the theory of change is, and we don't know what the answer to this is, but we know it's literally the only play we have, is a mass mobilization.
General strike.
General strikes. Pressure, 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 pressure. There needs to be a legal strategy. What other president, say you go through all of the hell of passing Medicare for all, and then the Roberts Supreme Court is like, all right, now we'll strike it down. What other president is going to go out on television and say, I need you on the streets? It's running from the Supreme Court. that's another reason, by the way, just to editorialize a little bit, why Warren, in some respects, like, yes, she's the second best to Bernie. Although again, it's not even a question of best. He's doing something different. But there is a massive contradiction in that campaign because it is liberal enough and progressive enough to piss off the Bill Gates of the world, but conventional enough and wonky enough to not have a strategy to implement any of that. So when they say she has a plan, it's like maybe for everything except for the actual plan. And so that momentum, that movement, and of course ultimately it can't depend on Bernie, but right now he's the conduit for it. That's the historical moment for him.
He says not me, us. I mean, that's his
And that's,
he means it. Yes, absolutely. When I spoke to him, when I interviewed him, one of my first questions, or the question I asked early on in the interview, was like, what basically you're alluding to, like, how do you get this done? What do you do? Will you go to West Virginia, do a rally against Joe Manchin in his own state, and say, listen, you're either going to vote for the will of the people, which is Medicare for all, or I will support a primary to your left, and this person will win, because I have a movement behind me, and you don't. And he said very quickly, yes, I'll do that. I'll do that. That's all I need to know right there. Because for all the positive things about Warren, that's not, she's fundamentally an inside player in Washington, D.C. And maybe, to be fair to her, maybe she thinks like, no, I can actually get people to move on these issues or whatever it might be. But when you're talking about fundamental change like Medicare for all, when you're talking about free college...
Congress has not taken on the healthcare industry because they haven't read a good enough medium votes. And insurance companies own the political process.
Yep.
And you need to engage in a raw act of power to reconfigure that. That goes for everything: workplace democracy, labor unions, foreign policy, the environment, how you're going to deal with big tech. You know, ideas are great and policy is important, but they are second-order things to strategy.
We're talking like a mobilization, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Civil Rights Movement. That's what we're talking about. And, you know, when Dr. King was assassinated, he was talking about economics. And it was the Poor People's Campaign and this movement. And Killer Mike says it best. He says, Bernie's the first candidate in my lifetime who's carrying on with that vision. And that's why it's important. Movement candidate, a really important election, and the only way we actually win on these things is to all get out there in the streets and have our ally in the White House who has our backs as we do it.
That's really powerful. I want to shift a bit to shift back to foreign policy. So the area that the president has the biggest influences is foreign policy. Yet interestingly, it's the least. They haven't really spent any time talking about it in the primary. In their joint rally in Minnesota last week, Ilhan Omar said, "I am beyond honored and excited for a president who will fight against Western imperialism." How significant is this, and how do you see Bernie governing as head of the U.S. empire? And how do you see Bernie morals and principles translating into his foreign policy?
Okay, I think that is super important that we now have somebody in Congress who will say the words Western imperialism. Mind-boggling that, like, we've had this collective delusion for all these years where you're not allowed to utter that which is so obvious. I mean, we're bombing 8 different countries. We have a shadow war going on in Africa. We have 900 military bases around the world. How can you say it's anything but imperialism? It's obviously imperialism. So to have, you know, a congresswoman say that is absolutely amazing. And let me just say about Ilhan Omar, I think she has been the most maligned, smeared congressperson I think maybe I've ever seen, because they immediately went to, oh, she's anti-Semitic, because she dared to say that, you know, AIPAC money influences people in Washington, D.C. And if you say
every single donation from every other interest group influences people. Separate that.
Exactly. See, that's what they want us to believe. You know, you can criticize the Saudi lobby, but if you criticize the Israel lobby, oh my God, you must be anti-Semitic. It's absurd. And they see, this is the point, guys. They cannot respond on actual policy substance, so they go right to the smear. And so Ilhan Omar is wonderful. And I think what Ilhan sees in Bernie is the same thing I see in Bernie, which is this is a guy who fundamentally believes we shouldn't be an empire. We shouldn't be an empire. Not one person shouldn't have that much power. And, you know, this goes back to another thing that I asked Bernie, where I said, will you do everything that you can using the power of your office that's constitutional? So in other words, you know, will you do executive orders which further your goals, which are the goals of the American people? And he said, yes, absolutely. And so having Bernie in this position, which is exactly what you're saying, the area where the president has the most impact, it's like that's everything. Because we have a president that quickly ends the war in Iraq, quickly ends the war in Afghanistan, you know, stops with our drone war where we're killing 90% civilians. Chomsky calls it the biggest terrorist program in the world today. So to have a president who acknowledges that we are indeed an empire, and to have a president who is committed to, you know, rolling back that empire, I think is everything. And also, by the way, you have the other upside of when you stop doing that, all of a sudden, hey, look at that, we have a lot more money that we could use for, I don't know, like infrastructure here at home. So I think that's also really cool.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kyle said, and I do, and it's funny because I've actually had some, modest criticism of Congresswoman Omar with regards to some of her Turkey policies, but that's like, really that's exactly the point. I mean, one is like she's gonna be more open to like interesting conversations like that because she's created a completely different playing field upon which you talk about foreign policy by being so unparalleled in her courage and clarity on things like Israeli apartheid, which it literally is, if we're going to use that word properly. Yes, like everything about this could not be more important, and it really should be, you should be telling everybody, like, not only, like, Bernie is a leader on foreign policy. No one has done more to try to end the genocide in Yemen, which we still support to this day. He's serious about the Iran deal, which is maybe the greatest long-term catastrophe of endless catastrophes. And by the way, Donald Trump is a fulfillment of empire. His rhetoric of isolationism occasionally sounds, it's entertaining. Might even sound sometimes like you have to agree with it. There is he lies every day. There's more civilian casualties under Trump than there was under Obama. So on a more practical level, though, I think people need to look at it as, and there's a guy I work a lot with, Daniel Bessner, who's a leftist international relations historian, who is really interested in like the policy work, how you actually, like, what do you do to dismantle the National Security Council? Like, how do you actually put war making back into Congress's hands and things like this? So you look, and in some respects, to actually go up against that apparatus, I'm sure is terrifying, right? Like, to say the least. So what you're gonna do if you elect someone like Sanders, who clearly has these actual anti-imperialist, anti-colonial instincts, is you start to set the stage for let's just let it roam. Rashida Tlaib or AOC administration to abolish the CIA, right? But you're laying the groundwork now in terms of institutional reform, and he is the only person on that stage who cares about it, who has an understanding. Again, look at his immigration proposal. There is a whole section on U.S. imperialism in Central and Latin America. No one else is bringing that to the table. No one else called for freeing Lula. He probably knew who Lula was in the 80s. I mean, this is a very unique proposition to elect president.
I'm actually Yemeni American, and so I'm so grateful for you mentioning raising awareness about the genocide and humanitarian crisis in Yemen. All the numbers to me are not just numbers, but they could be family members, they could be me. So really, thank you. That's actually my personal Bernie story, and why I support Bernie is because he co-introduced the War Powers Resolution to end U.S. involvement in supporting the Saudi-U.S. coalition war. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, there we go. It's a live show.
Okay, thank you.
And quick shout out just to Rohana as well, because he cares. get it done. And what a lot of people don't know is that in today's environment, it's actually really, you get people who are mad at you for working with people across the aisle, even when you're doing it on your grounds and coinciding with your values. And so Bernie actually worked with Mike Lee, who's a terrible senator from Texas. Texas or Utah? Utah, okay. Sorry, I caught myself though.
You got it.
But yeah, it's such an important issue, and Donald Trump is a liar and a fraud because he criticized Saudi Arabia previously, and then now as president, he's taking money from Saudi Arabia through his hotels as he's giving them a multi-billion-dollar weapons deal, and they're committing a genocide in Yemen. So he has blood on his hands, MBS has blood on his hands, and we got to get him out of the White House, because if we have a President Sanders administration, then yes, we end our aiding of a genocide in Yemen, which is so important. That's like, thing number one on the list is stop aiding a genocide. Seems pretty simple.
Yeah, so my question is, how would Bernie fight for universal human rights? And like, would he have a policy of positive intervention in atrocities like Yemen and the Uyghur genocide in Syria? Like, what do you guys think?
Well, I think the real question now is how do you redefine what, like, the humanitarian intervention project is an intellectual, critical failure, and it is a tool of saying,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
without a doubt. So the question now, and I'm someone like, I don't just want isolation. In terms of reality, you still have this massive, at the very least, diplomatic complex. So again, like, that's a question that I can tell you from behind the scenes that there isn't necessarily, I mean, the answers that are obvious are obvious. He can, in fact, end the genocide in Yemen because the president is vetoing that, right?
Yep.
Like, and there's a huge amount of discretion that the White House has. He can immediately say, we're not gonna just, we're gonna have a civilian halt or radically reduce drone usage. There's a lot of things like that. But more broadly, the question that in these circles people are asking themselves is like, if we get out of this horrifyingly stupid and really reactionary binary that is like, all right, either we ignore atrocities or we use them in a totally cynical way to promote regime change or implement vicious sanctions regimes that hurt civilian populations, what does critical engagement look like? Like the Uyghurs is a great example. There's not
the Rohingya too.
and the Rohingyas, well, the Rohingyas is an incredibly important example, but I'm saying in terms of China, you're not gonna have war with China unless you're a fucking idiot. You're not gonna be able to hit them with the sanctions. So what does it actually mean to use diplomatic power in that realm? And I think there's a lot of really open, live questions on that, which are really important. And again, it's another thing where, are there answers yet? No, not across the board at all. But is this the only campaign that is saying, or on another one where there's an easy, obvious example, they'll catch tremendous hell for it, which is like, yeah, our aid to Israel actually is subject to just treating Gaza as a starved open air prison. So I think it's some combination of, there's things that we all know we can do that are really hard, and it takes somebody with enormous courage to take it on, and a movement behind that candidate. That's Bernie. And then the whole other set is, we haven't thought through these things properly. And we need to actually empower a whole alternative base of policymakers and intellectuals and citizens and educators and activists to actually think through how we do it.
And to answer your question, I would say, thing number one is first do no harm. That's the easy part. That's to get out of Iraq and out of Afghanistan. Stop arming every single human rights violator who we arm. That includes Israel, that includes Saudi Arabia, that includes Egypt. So that's step number one. Step number two, because you're asking a very difficult question in terms of like, what do we actually do in the real world when there's an atrocity going on somewhere? That's where I say, make the UN great again. So basically, and I think Bernie, agrees with me on this, although I don't know, but certainly what I would do is, when there's an actual atrocity going on, when it's the Rohingya, when it's what's happening in Yemen, when it's the Uyghurs, yeah, like, I'm okay, Kashmir, exactly. I'm okay with the U.S. being a nation among nations that tries to prevent terrible things from happening. I'm just not okay with the U.S. being a nation above nations trying to stop bad things from happening. So if you get the international community together and we all agree, hey, we got a serious problem over here, we got a serious problem over there, then yes, you can mobilize and you can get, peacekeepers, for example, to prevent any further harm from being done as you try to negotiate settlements, for the long run. But that's my idea. No more offensive wars, no more wars of aggression, and try to make the UN do what it's supposed to do, which is, yes, stop atrocities, but we just cannot unilaterally anymore, and in contravention of international law, try to do stuff on our own.
I agree. I just want to add, there also just needs to be like a critical, this is more theoretical, like how do you really, because the world isn't coming together to talk about what's happening in Kashmir because of people's particular interests with regard to India and Kashmir, right? Like the balance between understanding that there is a bedrock commitment to the dignity and well-being of all human beings, and the fact that these institutions are like, there's a reason why, in this instance, the United States is so concerned about human rights. In the next instance, the United States is a co-participant in genocide. In this instance, the Russians are making a good point about, U.S. colonial interests. In this instance, they're, bombing the civilian population at a rate that is unprecedented in, the last couple of years. So how you navigate that balance is really hard, but you really do need somebody who's willing to fight on the basics, like Kyle just outlined, and then at the very least actually have a compass and not be delusional about the United States and its foreign policy.
Yeah, I think to comment on that too, with the idea of positive engagement, you mentioned earlier the immigration plan that Bernie released. One of the things in that section where he talks about our history of intervention is to say, look, if I get into the White House within the first 100 days, I'm going to bring together the leaders of the region, human rights activists around the region to come together and say, how can we help eliminate the conditions that force people into conditions where they might need to flee.
And the drug war. And the drug war.
Yeah,
the drug war on that list, yeah.
I do see an example already in his plans where he's outlining a way that you can engage positively, so I just wanted to throw that out as well. I think in the interest of time, we'd like to open it up to questions to the audience, and I think maybe if we can pass a mic to one of our people and they can sort of, so feel free to raise your hand, we'll try and call on people. Hopefully that mic is working.
It's not working.
Fake news.
You know what? Listen.
Well, maybe we can hear it, and then I can repeat it in the microphone so that they can pick it up. But maybe we'll start right here.
Just yell at us.
Yeah.
We won't be offended.
Project.
Yeah, hi, my name's Sammy.
Hi, Sammy.
So, yeah, it's going. So how do we get students for Birdie chapters across the country to connect with amazing progressive speakers like y'all on issues like single payer? And I mean like literally getting hundreds of students for Birdie chapters to like live stream a dope event with a bunch of progressives to like hundreds of campuses, thousands of students, and like elevate the conversation. And then also for Kyle, how can we get Hassan Lecky? I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's running in Joe Kennedy's seat and she's endorsed by Brand New Congress. How can we get her on TYT? I've been like adding and tweeting people, and like Nathan Hassan has like retweeted and liked my tweets, but going nowhere. So like, yeah.
Yeah, just talk to me after this event and I'll see. I can't promise anything because they're their own thing, so they might say no, but they'll probably say yes. They have guests all the time, But Brand New Congress is actually like a sister organization of Justice Democrats, so I'm surprised.
That's what I was told. If you get Brand New Congress, you get on TYT.
Yeah, they probably already have something scheduled that you and I don't know about. To tell you the truth, but we'll figure it out. And your other question about connecting and making these bigger events, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Michael was tweeting at Harvard yesterday. Like, why haven't you invited us yet? And they were like, we're working on it, bro. We're working on it. So yeah. So I guess one brick at a time. We're building the thing one brick at a time. But this is cool, I'm flattered that we were invited here. Thank you, Zach. Thank you to all the students for Bernie. I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. Very flattered to be here. But yeah, I mean, some sort of a college store or something where, you know, we get progressive speakers and we get, you know, all Bernie supporters, and we can make them like semi-rallies and stuff, you know. So yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Ask us.
That's his answer.
I will say, after tweeting about it, I got maybe like 10 different student chapters in my DM saying like, how did you get?
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest for sure, but they were like in Texas and stuff.
Well,
That would be a little bit harder.
Zach was like, I'm close to him, that's why he said yes.
Exactly.
Everybody knows I'm scared of planes, but anyway. Seriously, I am. I almost died coming into JFK like last week. And when I say almost died, I mean a normal landing that I
Can't trust it.
All the way in the back.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're in the church, and in a sense, you guys are kind of preaching to a choir. We all came here because we like what you say and we like Bernie. But something that's important that we can do is amplify what you are saying. So one of the important things we could all do is make calls for Bernie. I know some people definitely have already. But if the two of you were to make a call to someone in Iowa, or New Hampshire, or South Carolina, or speaking to a family member, I know I have older family members that feel warm enough to Bernie. What would you say if we could be your voice? What messages would you say that we deliver to new people?
First of all, that's a really great question. It's like saying, give me like your best pitch for Bernie, basically. Medicare for all, free college, living wage, end the wars, Green New Deal, end the drug war, free nonviolent drug offenders. I mean, I can keep going with policies, but that's why I support Bernie. It's all policy based. It's that this guy is representing an ideology that I fundamentally agree with. It's the change that we need. And also a really important point that everybody loves about him is that he's honest and he's totally uncorrupted. He says, hey, no, I'm not going to take corporate PAC money. I'm not going to take money from corporate. You'd be surprised. Like, you can get anybody going, wow, yeah, I really kind of like that guy. That's another thing that only you reference for honesty, you blew everybody out of the water. Because even if people disagree with him, they go, yeah, but he's obviously honest. So, yeah, that would be my pitch. And I would say, if you want to make it so that the U.S. catches up to the rest of the developed world and treats people with basic dignity, there is only one candidate, and his name is Bernie.
100%. I mean, I'll just add to that, you know, when you're talking, listen to them. I mean, what are you most concerned about? I haven't had a single conversation where I've asked somebody what they care most about politically that Bernie doesn't have the best answer for me. Because it's policy. Are you worried about the drug war? All right. You know, are you worried about healthcare? Are you worried about foreign policy? Are you worried about the climate? Like, what do you care about? This guy has a plan to match it. That is almost always the case. And it's also clarifying, you know, because if somebody's like, no, I really want to, like, I think the most important thing is that, you know, we get along better on CNN or something. That's okay. You know, go live your life. Because that is, but I mean, because honestly, part of this is you do have to preach to the choir, because the choir needs to be revved up and go out and get it done. You know, a lot of this is just mobilization.
Yeah, the best criticism of Bernie is like, oh, he keeps saying the same thing. Yeah, because we don't have health care for everybody, so why would you not say that?
Yeah, solve the problem. This is the deal.
And on that question too, is Luis, where's Luis at? So Luis in the back there, I'm gonna make a couple of Luises in here, but.
I had every Luis, equally.
He has a table outside here, and the campaign is doing something that's pretty cool, organizing people to actually travel to, if you're in a state that's close to one of the early voting states, they'll send a bus to take you, and so in our case, New Hampshire would be the state. So if there's enough interest and enough people sign up, they'll send a bus and bring you to New Hampshire to do canvassing. So the cool thing about Bernie is that I'm sure this is the only campaign that has over 1 million volunteers, right?
It is, yes.
And that's something to take advantage of, right? So after this event, be sure to go check out his table. It's on the ramp right when you come out here. If you're interested in going to New Hampshire, I would say that's a great way to start doing that. I see Luis's hand.
They're also working in housing, so for now, we're just trying to get about 70 people to sign up. And if we do, they're gonna get us a bus.
Great, so if there's 70 people, then they'll get us a bus, and they're working on housing. I did see that too. But they'll actually like put you up in a volunteer type. You can spend a whole weekend in New Hampshire, knocking doors, talking to voters in New Hampshire. So that's the way that we do this, right? So thanks, Luis, for that.
This one's for Kyle. Can you start calling Mayor Pete Booty Judge?
No, you call him Mayo Pete.
So I actually like sort of started that, and then I backed off of it a little bit because I saw criticism where people were like, "Oh, that's homophobic." And I'm like, "No, we're just having fun, and like everybody judges booties and enjoys booties." So, but yeah, I don't know. I just kind of shied away from that a little bit. But my favorite is still Bet on My Stork, which by the way, I'm one of like 6 people who enjoys that, but I still repeat it all the time. And then Amy Cloud Boot Jar, which is equally ridiculous because it's ridiculous. But anyway, yeah. So maybe I'll throw it out there every now and then, but then I have to make sure to never read my Twitter mentions ever again.
My name is Jonah. My friends wanted me to say this because I'm 18 today, and I didn't think I would make it this far either. My friends wanted me to say, Kyle, I was a freshman, sophomore year, I was politically apathetic. Then I started watching your show junior year, and now senior year, I'm a radical communist. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a democratic socialist for Bernie, so thank you. My question for you guys is the issue of trade was a prominent one in 2016, but now it's kind of taken backseat for the 2020. Why do you think it has become a backseat issue, and why do you think Bernie is the best candidate to address it?
So I think that's a great question. I would agree that it's not talked about as much in the media, but I would disagree that it's not as an important issue. However you say that sentence. So yeah, I think that since we have the Electoral College, since our election works the way it does, anybody who wins the election is going to have to win the Rust Belt. You just have to. There's no question about it. And that was the blue wall that fell. Hillary Clinton, famously didn't campaign in many of these states because she thought, like, I got that in the bag. And then meanwhile, Trump's there the final 2 weeks hammering away at, fight against TPP. She called it the gold standard. And he just kept going after and after and after on NAFTA and all these things. So I think it is as important an issue in this election. And I think Bernie is the only one who has the real credentials on it because he voted against all these terrible trade deals. And he cares deeply about bringing jobs back to that region, and to, of course, the entire country. But so I think it is as important of an issue. I think the media is not talking about it as much. But as we gear up and go more towards the general election, it'll be talked about more. And I would love to see in the debate, Bernie versus Trump on this issue, because Trump flat out lied and he didn't help this area. And you have, famously the GM plant shut down, recently the Lordstown plant shipped it to Mexico. There's been 93,000 jobs outsourced in Trump's first year as president, which is crazy because he ran as that anti-outsourcing guy and jobs are being outsourced. So, let Bernie get at him on that. And this is one of the main reasons why I think he's the best candidate. He's the most electable, is because the Rust Belt's going to see that. They're going to go, oh, this is a no-brainer. And Bernie will win every state against Trump.
Back to the media question, why is it that so many serious networks will, go right to the border of what do the candidates' horoscopes say about how they'll campaign in Iowa? You can watch our shows and it'll actually tell you what was in PNTR with China and who voted for NAFTA and what NAFTA actually did. And especially on a campus like this, don't listen to people's nerdy bullshit. Those trade agreements are bad.
So true. Yeah, so true.
In honor of Jonah's birthday, can we do a happy birthday?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jonah. Happy birthday to you.
Hey guys, very big fan, by the way, just have to say.
Thank you.
My question is, how do we, and and I want to frame this correctly. How do we revitalize the spirit and aptitude for a lot of the ideas we're talking about, a lot of the ideas Brian's been pushing from day one in like African American community? Because I just feel like when I speak to older groups of African Americans, in spirit, we're connected with these values. I mean, our greatest leaders have always honestly professed them. But the problem is, people are just tired of being in the streets, honestly. We've been in the streets forever. We've been always dealt a bad hand about that. And a lot of people are not trying to get excited about it because of that. And they're tepid in their excitement, even though they connect with these ideas. I just want to know, how do we frame it in a way where people can feel that they can get energized about this? It's not fool's gold. And I mean, honestly, when we talk in the community, we see Barack Obama, you can talk about the policies and whatever. We know he was attacked like no president we've ever seen. With that said, and how moderate to conservative policies were, people see that and they don't see an aptitude or room for Bernie to expand. I want to be able to communicate to these communities how this is possible. I want to make it possible.
I think Nina Turner said it best, which is that we have the receipts, and he's been fighting these fights for so long before you and I were born. So you have the receipts, and then also go there. Go there. People want to see you. People want to hear you. Go into these communities, do these rallies, march with them, protest, so on and so forth. And thankfully, he's doing all that. He's trying to build these bridges. He's 78 years old, and I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody work harder. I mean, I know, because I know some people in the campaign, and the word is that the day of the heart attack, later that night, he was like, oh, I feel good. Let's go do this.
Let's go.
Yeah, so anyway, that's my answer.
It's outrageous that the top 1% of the top 3%, 4%. I mean, that's obviously such an important question on so many levels. I mean, one, everybody uses this as like an electoral argument, but it's important because I think you're talking about people feeling disillusioned after years of struggle, and I think that is where the demographic breakdowns get different inside every community. And I think that there's even some of this within communities of people who have faced infinitely less oppression, frankly. Like a sense of, we've tried this, it's impossible, and so on. Part of my answer to that, though, and it adds to the generational component, is like, when you look at media and you look at the conversation, it's like, yes, of course there are areas that are, just racism that affect every single member of the Black community, as an example, of course. And at the same time, talking about the Black vote as an undivided monolith is actually real bullshit and essentializing, not strategic, and radically inaccurate. So even if we go back to 2016, and I was a fervent supporter, and I thought there was room for improvement on messaging and on policy. I think this time he's doing it. Already, if you go and you look at like Wisconsin, where in the 1970s you had an African American steelworking community that, because of civil rights activism and powerful unions, had an incredibly high standard of living and a legit middle class, and they got gutted along with, certainly every other worker in the Rust Belt. They went for Bernie. And so we need to start, like, every time they say, I mean, it's amazing to me because I feel like I can hit this as like an anti-woke, crude materialist, which I am in some ways, and also as somebody who wants to be like actually analytical about this stuff. Like, oh, well, when we get to South Carolina, that's when the Black vote comes in. Right. Bullshit. There's Black vote everywhere in the Democratic Party. And we're trying a family that migrated to Brooklyn from Guyana, who works in accounting and finance, has the same ideology, challenges, and perspective on the world as a family in South Carolina that was brought here as slaves from the beginning of this country? Of course not. It's ridiculous. So there needs to be a simultaneous real clarity on what the campaign actually is doing, room for improvement as always, and then also a serious pushback, because I don't, no, there aren't a handful of commentators and power brokers on television and in different institutions that speak for an entire, incredibly economically, demographically, and historically diverse community. That's essentializing, it's not true, it's bullshit, and it actually undermines the very specific fights against that structural racism as well. So I would bring that message, and also, I'll just wrap it up by saying, sometimes I think honestly for older people that are open to just be like, hey, I get it, you're burned out, you don't buy it, I make a request to somebody who still has, a very long time ahead of me, can we at least give this a shot? Because I'm gonna have to live with the consequences of not even trying.
Two more questions. I saw it at the red in the back. Yeah, trying to pull up.
No, other guy, sorry. He's had his hand up for about 3 hours, so red shirt. Fake news, totally fake news.
Guy in the red shirt.
Yes.
Great guy.
My friend, Wolfpack.
He's raising his hand for me, basically.
Okay.
Okay, I got it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it took me 30 minutes to understand that.
Alright, so we're with Wolfpack, Connecticut. For anyone that watches CYT, it's a group that Jan Huber kind of founded back during Wall Street. Our goal is trying to get money out of the political system through constitutional amendment or Wolfpack convention. So our question, well, I guess it's to both of you, Kyle and Michael. I know that Kyle's been supportive of Wolfpack in the past. I have no idea what Michael's position on this. I've heard talk about it. I guess
I support corporate money in politics.
No.
Guys might be a little controversial, but I have a different take on this.
Wolfpack is that we're trying to introduce the Article 5 Convention. Article 5 Convention is a very controversial and contested method of getting money out of politics. So,
I mean, can I just?
Wait, let him ask the question.
Sorry.
Go ahead, finish the question.
I wanted to hear particularly what Michael had to say about it, I've never heard him talk about before. I know Sam Cedar has expressed.
I was going to ask if that's what you're saying.
I wasn't going to. I wanted to know what your thoughts on it. I wanted to hear more in-depth from Kyle. I haven't heard Kyle speak about this in a very long time, so I wanted to hear what his thoughts on it.
To be really honest with you, I share Sam's concerns about that. I haven't heard. I think if you open a constitutional convention right now with politics as it is constituted, and to just be really clear, there's no, Kyle knows more about this than I do, and Sam knows more about this than I do, because I, spend more time reading about Brazil than this, so I'll own that. But there is no rule, and there is no prohibitive mechanism once you open the process. So I have yet to hear a clear answer as to how.
I'll give it when you're done.
Okay, no, but like a technical one, right? I hear people say, well, it gets open through this activism and people will be outraged and they won't take it. The Cook Bros don't give a fuck about that. If you open up a constitutional process, by the way, to a right wing that has had in the works for decades, Wolfpack has done incredible work in a couple of years to put money in politics on the table. Groups like ALEC and others have for decades been saying we should have a constitutional process to push a balanced budget amendment and gut not only the welfare state as it exists, but make that prohibitive in the future. So I understand, and I mean, I gotta be, just preemptive with you. We've had this conversation. I understand there'll be pushback, this and that, but I have yet to hear, and it would be new information to me, if there is an actual legal mechanism that says, we open this for this specific purpose, and it will be for this specific purpose. If you have that and it checks out, I would be more interested.
Well, the answer is that it's the only thing that like over 80% of the actual people agree on. So like ending corruption is something that is, you talk to your Republican uncle at the Thanksgiving dinner table, they're like, yeah, I hate the corruption, of course, and they're all corrupt, they're all terrible, they're all upset. So everybody agrees that corruption is bad, and so if you have a constitutional convention, you're not gonna get the numbers that you need to do a balanced budget amendment, you're not gonna get the numbers that you need to do any of these terrible ideas.
Well, wait, what numbers? I mean, Kyle, how many people do you think supported, especially the Medicaid expansion inside of the ACA? It's by far the most popular part of the ACA. The Supreme Court made up before the ACA ruling, everybody said, even if the Roberts Court guts Obamacare, the Medicaid expansion, that's gonna be really hard legally to figure out and block that. They literally made something up and blocked it.
The Supreme Court did that.
Yes, the Supreme Court.
Right, and the constitutional amendment goes above the Supreme Court.
It goes, yes.
That's the point. Is we know that the whole system is so corrupt that we have to find a way to get this change implemented where we go above all the BS. And when you go above the Supreme Court, you're going, that's the last stop. That's the last bus stop. And the point is that that's the only thing that we actually could get through a constitutional convention. Is you can't, there's not enough agreement on all the other issues. Go ahead, Glenn, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, I don't mean to pester you, but if Michael has a minute after the show, he'd be open and should be hearing a clear answer on this, because my friends and I have actual,
Yeah.
answers around this.
I mean, just to let Michael know that, this is something Cenk has had debates with people on this exact point, and you would be mortified at who is defending, who's making the argument that you're making here. I think you.
Well, no, I've seen Sam argue with. I mean, look, I'm not going to do
But they've just been duped is the point by corporate tools who came up with this rationalization after the fact. Like, no, we can't do that because all these bad things will happen. It's nonsense.
I think you're way more sanguine about how power works in this situation than me. So I think,
It's
to be honest,
it's a hard path. It's so hard.
I think, in my view, a technical, ultra complicated process like this, which look, and again, I will totally listen to what you're saying, and I always listen to what Kyle's saying. None of the answers, yes, there's a ton of tools that oppose it. Yes, this would be popular. None of them have an answer.
Has there ever been a runaway convention? Has there ever been a runaway convention,
No, there hasn't.
See, so it's made up. They're like, oh my God, what if they come up with
There's a lot of things that have never happened that have been happening in this country recently. Guys, I mean...
Let's continue this conversation after, maybe get to the questions.
I mean, look, unfortunately, Kyle is very naive on this.
Wrong.
I would just say, 10 seconds, that type of energy, that type of effort, make it for Bernie, make it for Medicare for all, make it something tangible and not process-oriented. That's what
All right, we're gonna do one final
one more question, guys.
We'll go over here. Yep. Yeah.
It was just some information I want to share, and then you guys comment. But I wanted to just share my experience. I've been organizing for 41 years, and I became of left in college. I got old back in the 80s when Bernie got elected as mayor. So this is a big deal for me because I've spent 40 years of almost always voting third party because almost every Democrat was horrendous. But the importance of organizing is amazing. So I'm just going to point out to the race that Michael's talked about, which is Councilwoman Sawant in Seattle, if I pronounced it right.
It was
Sawant, I think. Right, and this has to do with... Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah, you did, and I think there might be good news on that.
Yeah, so Bernie, Bernie was an organizer and movement stuff. I've been doing that for a long time. Central American stuff, that's where I started with. I'm a Latin American Studies major, and I did some public speaking here for election campaigns back 20 years ago or so. But Amazon approved 1-point-something million along with other corporate interests, and I sent her money. I don't have a lot of money, but I sent her money. Everyone helped out, and now she's in the lead and probably will win. And that's an amazing thing. And then I want to get a comment from you guys on that, and then I want to connect that international. I know that's also important. We talked about foreign policy and Bernie. So a judge a few hours ago basically said set the situation for Lula to be freed. And then Lula endorsed Bernie 2 hours ago, and Bernie responded back. And I just think that kind of stuff is real important. I've seen in my community the Honduran thing 10 years ago. Honduran refugees, and I live up in the Waterbury, it's not far from there. So I just think that organizing, I'm probably one of the ones here, I'm 58. Organizing is a way of life. And the rich never stop, and they got the money. And even if Bernie wins, and Bernie's got 2 terms, they're still going to not stop. They didn't stop at FDR. And so I'm just sharing my experience and looking back at things, and just getting your guys' feedback.
Well, I don't want to repeat myself too much. We talked about Lula in the beginning, but yeah, I mean, I think that the freedom of Lula and what that represents is incredibly important for Latin America. It's frankly geostrategically, I mean, the Amazon is sort of important for everybody. And I agree, these issues are deeply interconnected, and you need somebody who talks about it and understands it on that level. And I also hope that, you know, maybe you can learn from the campaign too, that organizing, like, even if it's not your profession, even if you know, that's not your life, you can make that phone call, you can knock on that door and, you know, put some time in it. Because you're right, the oligarchy will never stop. And, well, until they stop, there might be some longer term plans for that. But yeah, I mean, it's any Sanders agenda is going to take incredible maximum effort. I mean, it's a different situation, and Brazil has, you know, weaker institutions, frankly, but there is analogs. I mean, Lula takes 40 million people out of poverty, the Workers' Party wins 4 elections in a row, and what do? All right, well, let's have a judicial coup with U.S. support. Yeah, takes a hell of a lot.
Yeah, and I was going to comment too on that. You mentioned you supported elections that aren't in Connecticut, and you tie it, you know, it's an international movement of workers, right? And I think that when you see Lula endorse Bernie, we saw Evo Morales in Bolivia endorse Bernie, we see Jeremy Corbyn yeah, so never before have I seen a United States politician even really talk with the left in the rest of the world. I mean, I've never seen that before. So this is sort of unprecedented to have a united left with the United States in it, right? So yeah, I think if that helps with your comment too, that, you know, it's not just about supporting candidates in other states. That's really great, and we need to bolster the left here. We also need to be supporting it across the rest of the world. So I don't know if you have anything to comment.
Oh, no, to the Kashana Swan thing, I'm very happy that, because I thought she lost.
No.
And I know there
still
was
counting ballots, and she's in the lead. And
how much is she in the lead by?
She's the lead by 0.5%, but she's winning.
So it's like 1.4% now. They do mail.
Yeah. Well, they said that a lot of the late voters, there's a lot of that, and those tend to be younger and on the left. And Sean Scott, I'm not sure if that's his name.
Sean Scott.
He's a DSA guy. Yeah. He's behind Moore. He'll probably lose by 2-3 million.
Yeah, because I heard that Amazon and Boeing and all these companies pumped millions of dollars into that race because she's not even a Democratic socialist. She's like, I'm a socialist.
Yes.
And so when they hear that, they're like, break out the big guns. We're going after her now. So anyway, it's amazing. It's great that she looks like she's going to win. And I did a video the other day, and I was talking about, the one downside was Kashama Swan lost. So now we get to give a positive update.
Back to the content, man.
Yeah. Also, Chessa from San Francisco.
Yes.
He's back up in the league.
Oh, he's back up.
Anyway, I think we're going to call it with that last question. Just a couple comments before you all leave. Don't forget that there are 3 different tables when you go outside. One of them's just the Yale for Bernie table. We've got swag, and we've got our laptop up so you can give us your email if you're on campus or near campus and want to get involved. We have the Medicare for All CT table. Chat with them, they're great people. And then we also have the table if you're interested in canvassing up in New Hampshire. Highly encourage that as well. Why don't we just, the other thing, do we have that petition up?
We can put it up. Yeah.
We'll put it up. We were supposed to have a special guest with us tonight who unfortunately couldn't make it the last minute, but his name is Christian. And he's a Yale PhD student in history whose mom is currently facing deportation, was arrested by ICE, and is also has stage 4 cancer. And so he is a student on campus here, and he really wanted to be here tonight to share his story, but he asked that we share it for him. There's a petition going around to demand her release, and it sounds like, you know, he was texting me just before we started that they might have found some roadblock to throw at ICE that might delay this, because the deportation was scheduled to be either today or tomorrow. So it's really imperative that we stand with him. So we're going to have that pulled up as well if you would be willing to sign that petition. And I think that's the last thing that we have. Can we just give a round of applause for our great
Thanks so much, guys.
Bernie.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much. Guys, wait. Wait, over Hi, my laptop was there and now it is not. You paid. Wait, that's amazing. Yeah, tell him to come up here. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.